No one wanted to believe it. But as Messi stood there, tears in his eyes, the world knew this was real. The press conference room was silent. Cameras flashed, but no one spoke. Journalists sat frozen, pens in hand, unsure whether to write or simply watch. The weight of the moment pressed against the walls, heavy and unshakable. Messi sat at the table, dressed simply, no extravagant suit, no grand gesture. Just him, a microphone, and the club crest beside him, the same one that had been stitched to his chest for over 2 decades. His hands rested on the surface, fingers lightly gripping the edge, as if holding on to something that was already gone. He exhaled, slow and controlled, but the emotions threatened to break through. His lips parted slightly, ready to speak, yet for a brief second, no words came. He swallowed hard, forcing down the overwhelming tide rising in his chest. The club he had called home since childhood was no longer his. The badge he had kissed after every goal, the stadium that had roared his name, the fans who had chanted for him from the stands, everything had changed. He lifted his head, eyes glistening, and looked at the sea of faces before him. Some journalists avoided eye contact, unwilling to meet the gaze of a man whose heart had just been ripped apart. Others clutched their cameras tighter, capturing history in real time. The silence stretched. Then, finally, Messi's voice broke through, quiet but firm. "This is not how I wanted to say goodbye." His voice shook, the weight of every memory pressing down on him, and the world listened. Just months earlier, Messi sat with his family, confident that Barcelona would remain his home. The decision had been made. A contract extension was in place, the details finalized. His mind had already moved forward, focused on the upcoming season, the goals he would chase, the trophies still left to win. He had walked into the club's offices with certainty. The signatures would be added, the deal announced, and life would continue as it always had. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. The bond between him and Barcelona was unbreakable. Or so he thought. Then, the meeting took a turn. Whispers of financial instability had been circulating for months, but nothing had suggested that it would reach this point. The club, drowning in economic turmoil, had been left with no choice. The new contract, despite being agreed upon, could not be registered. The rules, the restrictions, the limits imposed by the league, every factor stacked against them. It did not matter that Messi had lowered his salary. It did not matter that both sides wanted the same outcome. The numbers did not align. The papers could not be signed. The doors that had always been open were now closed. The impossible had happened. Messi had to leave. The news sent shockwaves through the football world. Teammates sat in disbelief, unable to process that the man who had carried the club for years would no longer wear its colors. Fans gathered outside the stadium, holding onto flags and jerseys as if they could somehow reverse reality. Online, legends of the game reacted with sorrow, struggling to understand how the greatest player in Barcelona's history could be let go. Every highlight, every memory, every moment now belonged to the past. The dream had ended, not on the pitch, not with a final goal, but in a meeting room, with financial reports deciding the fate of a legend. Messi sat in front of the world's media, the club's emblem still visible behind him, a painful reminder of everything he was leaving behind. The cameras zoomed in, catching the way his fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the microphone. His eyes were red, his breathing unsteady. No pre-written statement could soften this moment. No practiced words could ease the weight of what was happening. He swallowed hard, exhaling slowly. The room remained silent. Every journalist, every photographer, every person watching from behind their screens knew they were witnessing something historic. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt, but the tears kept forming. This was not a farewell he had prepared for. "I never imagined this day would come," he finally said, voice breaking under the weight of his emotions. He paused, as if hearing his own words made them even more real. He had spent his entire life with this club. The idea of leaving had never truly felt like a possibility, not like this. His eyes moved across the room, looking at familiar faces, people who had covered his career since he was a boy. Some avoided his gaze, unable to watch the pain etched across his face. Others simply nodded, as if silently telling him they understood. "Barcelona is more than a club to me," he continued, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. "It's my life, my family, my home." The memories flooded back. The first day at La Masia, a skinny kid from Argentina, barely able to speak the language, stepping onto the pitch with nothing but a dream. The years of training, The sacrifices, the moments of doubt, the first team debut, the goals, the titles, the nights where the Camp Nou roared his name, every victory, every celebration, every heartbreak, all tied to this club, to this city. He shook his head slightly, trying to compose himself. I grew up here. I raised my children here. I thought I would finish my career here. His voice cracked again, and he paused, gripping the microphone a little tighter. The audience remained frozen. No murmurs, no shifting of chairs. The weight of his words hung in the air. This was not just a player leaving a team. This was the end of an era, the closing of a story that had defined football for 2 decades. Messi looked down for a moment, his emotions threatening to take over completely. The journalists waited, some already wiping away their own tears. Then, finally, he looked up again, forcing the smallest, saddest smile. I wanted to say goodbye on the pitch, he admitted, with the fans, with the stadium full. But life doesn't always go the way we expect. A deep breath, a final glance at the crest beside him. And with that, Lionel Messi, the greatest player in Barcelona's history, said goodbye. Outside the stadium, the streets of Barcelona were flooded with fans. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, many holding banners with messages of love, gratitude, and disbelief. Flags waved in the air, jerseys with the number 10 stretched across backs like a final tribute to the man who had given them everything. Some chanted his name in unison, their voices raw with emotion, while others simply stood in silence, unable to process what had just happened. Tears were everywhere. Grown men sobbing into their scarves, children clutching Messi posters as their parents tried to explain why their hero was leaving. A fan held up a sign that read, Messi es Barcelona, his hands shaking as he lifted it higher, as if trying to reach the star himself. Another dropped to his knees, head in his hands, unable to accept that an era had just ended. The internet mirrored the heartbreak. Within minutes, social media exploded. Hashtags like #GraciasMessi, #10forever, and #GoatLeavesHome trended worldwide. Videos of Messi's greatest moments flooded timelines. His first goal, his Champions League triumphs, the iconic night against Bayern, the legendary dribbles that defied logic. Fans posted tributes, thanking him for every memory, every moment of magic. Former teammates joined in, their messages raw and unfiltered. Xavi called it, a loss that will never be replaced. Puyol tweeted, you gave everything. Thank you, my brother. Neymar posted a broken heart emoji saying, I still can't believe it. Even rival players, those who had battled him for years, showed their respect. Sergio Ramos, a longtime adversary, admitted, football will never be the same. Clubs across the world acknowledged the moment. Real Madrid's official account posted a tribute, a rare sign of respect between the fiercest of rivals. PSG players welcomed him with open arms, but even they understood. This was not a celebration. This was history rewriting itself in the most painful way. Back in Barcelona, a fan stood outside the Camp Nou gates, staring up at the stadium's lights. It feels empty, he whispered. Around him, people wiped their eyes, held on to each other, unwilling to leave, as if staying there could somehow make Messi stay too. But deep down, they all knew. This was real, and football would never be the same again. Messi sat there for a few more seconds, his hands resting on the table, his body still, as if he could freeze time for just a little longer. His eyes, red from the flood of emotions, scanned the room one last time. Journalists, photographers, club staff, some familiar faces, some strangers, watched him in silence, fully aware that they were witnessing history. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. Then, slowly, he pushed his chair back and stood up. The scraping sound against the floor felt louder than anything else in that room. His shoulders, which had carried Barcelona for so many years, sagged slightly under the weight of reality. This was it, his final act as a Barcelona player. For a moment, he hesitated. His eyes traveled to the club crest on the backdrop behind him, the emblem he had worn across his chest for over 2 decades. He had kissed that badge after every goal, lifted trophies under its name, fought through injuries and setbacks, given everything he had. And now, it would no longer be his. His lips pressed together, forming a bittersweet smile that never fully arrived. He exhaled deeply, his breath shaking slightly, and then, in a small but powerful gesture, he lifted his hand and waved. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing this moment from every angle, every expression, every movement, Every tear rolling down his face would be replayed for years to come. Messi turned toward the exit, each step heavier than the last. Just as he reached the doorway, he paused and turned back one final time, his gaze lingering on the stage where he had spoken. That was where he had said goodbye. Not on the pitch, not in front of 90,000 roaring fans, but in a quiet room filled with flashing lights and silent sorrow. Outside, thousands of fans stood in the streets, their chants of "Messi, Messi, Messi" echoing through the city. Some waved flags, others held up jerseys, their voices raw with desperation. Many still refused to accept the truth. To them, he was Barcelona. He couldn't just leave. He shouldn't leave. But the decision was final. The doors of the press room swung shut behind him, and with that, an era ended. The images would live forever. The boy who had arrived in Barcelona at 13, now walking away as the club's greatest icon. The farewell that never should have happened, but did. The press conference had ended, but the impact of that moment would never fade. Lionel Messi had left Barcelona, and football would never be the same again. Just days later, Messi was seen at the airport, walking toward a private jet, surrounded by his family and close friends. The cameras followed every step, every movement. His face was hidden behind dark sunglasses, but there was no mistaking the emotion beneath them. This wasn't just another transfer. This was a man leaving behind everything he had ever known. A group of Barcelona fans had gathered near the airport gates, some holding signs, others simply standing in silence, hoping for a final glimpse. Some wore Messi jerseys, clutching them to their chests like relics from a past that had been taken from them too soon. A few still held on to the hope that something, somehow, would change, that this was all a mistake, and he would turn around and come back. But deep down, they knew. The reality had settled in. Inside the jet, Messi sat by the window, staring out at the city he had called home for more than 2 decades. The skyline, the stadium in the distance, the streets where fans had celebrated his greatest moments. He exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. Barcelona had given him everything, and now, for the first time in his career, he was heading toward the unknown. As the plane lifted off, millions of people around the world refreshed their screens, waiting for news. Every movement was tracked, every rumor dissected. What would happen next? Where would Messi go? Could he ever recreate what he had at Barcelona? Then, the announcement came. Paris Saint-Germain. A new chapter, a new team, a new city. The club's official statement flooded social media, the first images of Messi in a PSG tracksuit igniting a whirlwind of reactions. Paris welcomed him with open arms. Fans lined the streets, waving banners, chanting his name, eager to embrace their new superstar. The Eiffel Tower lit up in his honor. The club's official store struggled to keep up with the demand for jerseys with Messi 30 printed on the back. But despite the celebrations, something still felt different. Back in Barcelona, the Camp Nou stood in silence. No chants, no flags, no familiar figure stepping onto the pitch with that determined expression. The number 10 jersey, once a symbol of greatness, now felt like a ghost of the past. Teammates still in the dressing room spoke in hushed tones, struggling to adjust to the reality of a world without Messi leading them onto the field. The club's social media pages posted tributes, but fans flooded the comments with grief, refusing to accept that their greatest icon was gone. Meanwhile, across the football world, legends weighed in. Xavi called it the greatest loss in club history. Ronaldinho spoke of an emptiness that can never be filled. Even rivals, players who had fought against him for years, admitted that the game itself felt different. Cristiano Ronaldo posted, "The history we created will live forever, a true legend." The transition had begun. A new journey awaited. But even as Messi stepped onto the training grounds in Paris, even as he posed with his new teammates, even as he prepared for a new league, a new challenge, one truth remained. This wasn't just a transfer. It was the end of an era. Fade to black. Football will never forget.